Hi, welcome to Comic Showcase. Today I'm going to be talking about someone who used to be really well known, but has kind of been forgotten. Her name is Mary Roberts Rinehart. And she is more important than some of you probably know. Some of you might have heard of her, but she's pretty important to comic books, actually. So she's also known as the American Agatha Christie. Even though she began publishing before Agatha Christie, because she began writing in 1903. She started writing because her and her husband, her husband was a doctor, and there was a stock market crash, and they lost all their money, or a lot of their money. And so they needed a way to supplement some income. So Mary Roberts Rinehart started to write to make money, and she became very prolific. Because people liked her novels. She's important because she basically helped shape modern mystery and suspense. She ended up being one of the best paid and widely read writers of her time. And she did do other things. She was a war correspondent, and she wrote for newspapers and things like that. But she also did her fiction writing. She's kind of known for pioneering the saying or the trope, "had I but known," and that sort of suspense style. And she's also known for the saying, "the butler did it." So that came from her novel, The Door, in the 1930s, which we've all heard, "the butler did it." So I thought it was kind of funny that she developed that. Her storytelling basically would go on to shape a few different things. First, the old dark house genre, the like spooky dark house. The second one would be a woman alone in a threatening house, so like a thriller, you know. So many horror movies use that. Another one would be secret passages or a mass killer, stormy nights. And the last one would be a mix of humor and suspense. So that was used in the 1930s and 40s mysteries, but I can think of some today that still use that, and that's kind of taken from how she wrote. But before she was famous, Mary Roberts Rinehart, she trained as a nurse. As I said, her husband was a doctor, so it kind of would make sense for her to want to be a nurse or to train as one. And she, as I already mentioned, started writing because they lost their money in a stock market crash, and she needed a way to make money. But the medical background shows in her writing because she often has characters who are either nurses, or she has a very practical, observant kind of character, very related to the medical field. One of her most famous books, and actually ended up selling, I think it was like 1.25 million copies, even during her time, The Circular Staircase. And she wrote this book in 1908. It was a breakout bestseller, and it was adapted multiple times for stage and for screen. And so this book really made her name known. And then later in 1926, she wrote The Bat. These stories are basically the same story, except for the bat, she added the bat character in the beginning and in the end, and she sprinkled the bat in basically to make it so it was more marketable for a Broadway play. She was writing it as a play for Broadway. But the bat would become also widely read and adapted. And the criminal in this story is a mysterious figure called the Bat. Obviously, the Bat name as a character is dramatic, and it's a fear-based identity. So that helped influence Batman for later. For all of us who love comic books and love the character Batman, Mary Roberts Rinehart helped influence that with her story, The Bat. Even though in her story it was a criminal, there were some similarities, and the things that she influenced, as I said, were the dramatic, the fear-based identity, and also the bat is a shadowy winged figure. So in the story, he's a costumed figure who dresses as a bat, and he has bat wings, and he appears suddenly, and he moves in darkness, and he has a cloak-like silhouette that spreads as wings, and he has clawed gloves. So very reminiscent of Batman. Because, you know, Batman had a cape, he had wings, he staged frightening entrances, and he was a creature of the night. So it's very similar. Another thing she helped influence was a figure who weaponizes fear. So the Bat figure weaponized fear and was known mainly by his reputation. And people would panic at the mere mention of the Bat. And he was basically more myth than man. And that's the same as Batman. Most of us would agree. Also, the Gothic mansion where the story takes place, it has secret passages, and it has a Gotham-style tone. And similar to some of the noir architecture, or the Batcave even, like, some of that comes from her novel, because she wrote, you know, a lot of times in her summer homes, or these homes that are very, they're mansions and kind of almost have a abandoned or Gothic feel. The fifth is a masked identity as a theatrical performance. So it's a normal person with a concealed identity, and that's what the Bat was. He would even leave at every crime scene, he would leave a calling card or some sort of symbol of the Bat to represent himself as the person who did the crime, which is very similar to Batman stories. The only difference is Batman is not a criminal. Sixth thing is she influenced crime and detective story fusion. So it was a mystery, and it was about uncovering who the masked figure was. And that's very similar to Batman as well. So what the Bat didn't influence, so what Mary Roberts Rinehart can't take credit for with Batman, is his superhuman abilities, his moral crusader aspect, so the good side, and also the gadgets and the technology. She did not influence any of that. She didn't have any part in influencing his origin story, and her character never had a sidekick. These attributes, like the superhero abilities and the moral crusader and the gadgets, those came from other things. For instance, some of it came from pulp heroes like The Shadow or Zorro or Doc Savage, and other film visuals. And then Batman also is credited from coming from Bill Finger, who shifted the character to a more noir style. So instead of being this bright costume character, he became dark. And that's credited to Bill Finger. So in the influence hierarchy, I guess you could say the Shadow supplied the tone, the methods, and the vigilante structure. Zorro supplied kind of the dual identity. So like Bruce Wayne has that dual identity of the businessman and Batman. So Zorro supplied that. The Bat from Mary Roberts Rinehart supplied the name, the imagery, the fear symbol concept, and then Doc Savage was kind of like this peak human condition plus technology. And then Dracula and silent horror kind of influenced visual staging, and Sherlock Holmes influenced the detective brain of it all. But basically, it's generally agreed that Bob Kane created the Batman brand, Bill Finger created the character, the pulp created the genre, and the Bat gave him his symbol. So she basically created the entire symbol that became Batman. And so the symbol, the theatrical fear, and the persona, and the imagery that made the Bat-themed character, and even the surrounding, like Gotham. And it's funny because those things were considered powerful and marketable, which is why it worked for Batman. But that's ultimately what she was trying to do at the time too. She was trying to make her story, The Circular Staircase, more marketable for a play, for Broadway. So that's why it became The Bat. Other popular titles of hers were The Man in Lower Tower, which is like an early detective mystery. When a Man Marries, She also had this series of Tish stories, which is her comic mysteries, but they were with friends and they were interesting. People seemed to really like those. The Amazing Adventures of Letitia Carberry, which was more like lighter and witty, which is kind of part of the Tish stories. A lot of hers were adapted into different movies. You can look into those, but some are like The Bat Whispers and things like that. But the whole reason I found Mary Roberts Rinehart was because Dell Publishing, from 1942 or 1943 to basically the mid-50s, had a series of mystery books, and they were called mapbacks. And so these mystery books, for instance, The Haunted Lady, which has a character in it called Miss Pinkerton, and she's a nurse, but she's also kind of a detective. And she's a character that you'll hear about in some of these stories, but she's a really fun character. But anyways, she was popular, and The Haunted Lady is a story where she's the character solving it. She's a nurse who's assigned to a house, and somebody's murdered, and she starts to put it together. But with the mapbacks, it was the first time there was maps drawn on the back, and it's kind of like Clue, where you can read the story, and as you're reading it, you can look at these maps and you can understand where certain things are taking place, like where certain crimes are being committed or where certain activities are happening. So it all makes sense when you're trying to read the story. So it's pretty fun. Yeah, so Dell did a series of these. She also wrote another book, The After House. This was also in a mapback form. I don't have the mapback, but it also was in a mapback form. And this is based on a true story. This is also very interesting, having to do with Mary Roberts Rinehart, because this book influenced President Roosevelt, who wasn't the president at the time, but he ended up talking to the sitting president, Woodrow Wilson, and getting him to agree to pardon a criminal who was in jail for a crime that he thought he was, maybe didn't get a fair trial, or there was enough possibility that it might not be him, based on this novel, that he should be pardoned. So Graham got pardoned because of this book. And if you want to look up the true story, it's called, the ship that they were on was called the Hubert Fuller, and it was basically an axe murderer. And there was only 12 people on the boat, and 3 people ended up killed, and they never figured out who actually did it. So it is interesting, and this book is about that story. But Mary Roberts Rinehart was an interesting woman in her own right. She also had, I think her writing was so good on some of these things because she also had her own attempted murder. One of her servants, or I've heard different accounts, but one of them says her chef, one of them just as a servant, tried to kill her. They pulled a gun and it didn't shoot, and so then the servant grabbed a knife and chased her around and tried to kill her, and then the other servants ran in and detained him, so he wasn't able to stab her or kill her. And again, there's different accounts of it, but basically either he was in jail or he was waiting to go to jail the next day. He committed suicide, so because he couldn't live with what had happened, I suppose. But so maybe her writing was so good because she also had that first-hand experience. Anyways, there were other writers in the mystery novels with the mapbacks. One was H.W. Rawdon, and one of the books was called Too Busy to Die. And here's the picture of the map on the back of this one. They're all slightly different, but this is also a really fun story. Basically, a man shows up to a man's office, and you start learning that basically he's a publicist, or he does marketing and things. And so this other man shows up, and he's telling him a story about his hard life. He was an orphan, and now he's made a ton of money in oil, and he wants to try and find his parents, so he wants him to put his name in the newspaper and all this stuff. But the night that they're supposed to do that, the next morning they're going to run the story. They instead run a story that a man was murdered. And the man who was murdered is this man who went to his office with a lot of money, with a strange suit, and saying he's from a different town and that he's trying to find his parents because he was an orphan. And the family that he was raised by was not nice to him. And so he ended up leaving early and then somehow became wealthy through buying land and finding oil on his land. So it's an interesting book, but all of them are pretty short, easy reads that are fun. So interesting though, and I think it's important to know Mary Roberts Rinehart because she should get some credit for influencing Batman, since all of us love Batman so much. So I hope you enjoyed my video, and I hope you learned something. And don't forget, Mary Roberts Rinehart. Thank you.